You know that moment when you're scrolling through your bank account and you see that automatic transfer of $100 going out every week, and you can't help but wonder if it's actually making any difference. Maybe you're thinking that $100 a week feels like such a small amount compared to those massive investment portfolios you see people talking about online. Or perhaps you've convinced yourself that real wealth building requires thousands of dollars to even get started. Well, I'm about to show you something that might completely change how you think about small, consistent investments. That weekly $100 transfer isn't just disappearing into the void. It's actually the foundation of something much bigger than you realize. My name is Alex, and I spend way too much time analyzing investment strategies, compound growth, and the psychology behind wealth building. If you've ever wondered whether those small weekly contributions are actually worth it, or if you want to understand the real mathematics behind consistent investing, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it helps you see your money differently. Before we dive into the specific numbers, let me ask you something. When you think about building wealth, what comes to mind first? Maybe you picture someone making huge stock picks that double overnight. Or perhaps you imagine needing a massive lump sum to even begin investing. The truth is, wealth building doesn't work the way most people think it does. The real magic happens in the most boring way possible, through consistency, patience, and understanding how compound growth actually works in practice. Here's something that will probably surprise you. Most millionaires didn't build their wealth through get-rich-quick schemes or by hitting home runs with risky investments. They built it by doing something incredibly mundane week after week, month after month, year after year. They automated their investments and let time do the heavy lifting. And that's exactly what happens when you commit to investing $100 every single week for 5 years straight. Let's start with the basic mathematics, because this is where things get really interesting. $100 per week over 52 weeks equals $5,200 per year. Do that for 5 consecutive years and you've contributed $26,000 of your own money. Now, if you just stuffed that money under your mattress, you'd have exactly $26,000 after 5 years. Not terrible, but not exactly life-changing either. But here's where the magic of compound growth starts to reveal itself, when you invest that $100 weekly into a diversified portfolio that tracks the overall stock market. Something remarkable begins to happen. Based on historical market returns, a diversified index fund has averaged roughly 10% annual returns over long periods. Now, that 10% isn't guaranteed, and some years will be higher while others might be lower or even negative. But over a 5-year period, that average gives us a pretty good baseline for what's possible. Here's where the math gets exciting. Your first $100 investment has 5 full years to grow. Your second $100 has slightly less time, and so on. Each weekly contribution gets a different amount of time to compound, creating this beautiful snowball effect that most people never take the time to actually calculate. By the end of year 5, assuming that 10% average return, your $26,000 in contributions has grown to approximately $100,000. Think about that for a second. You contributed $26,000 of your own money, but your investment account shows $100,000. Where did that extra $74,000 come from? It came from your money working alongside you, generating returns that then generate their own returns. This is compound growth in action, and it's the closest thing to magic that exists in the financial world. But here's what makes this strategy so powerful, and it's something most people completely miss. The consistency matters more than the amount. Someone who invests $100 every single week for 5 years will likely end up with more money than someone who invests $2,600 once per year, even though they're contributing the same total amount. Why? Because dollar cost averaging smooths out market volatility and ensures you're buying more shares when prices are low and fewer shares when prices are high. Let me paint you a picture of what this looks like in practice. During your first year, you're contributing $5,200 and watching your account balance grow slowly. Maybe by month 6, you have $2,800 in your account, which includes some growth on your earlier contributions. It doesn't feel like much is happening, and honestly, it might feel a little underwhelming. This is where most people give up, because the progress feels too slow to matter. But something shifts in year 2. Now you're adding $100 per week to an account that already has some serious momentum. Your earlier contributions are generating returns, and those returns are starting to contribute meaningfully to your overall growth. Maybe by the end of year 2, your account shows $12,000, even though you've only contributed $10,400. That extra $1,600 represents money your investments earned without you having to work for it. Year 3 is where things start getting really interesting. You're still contributing the same $100 per week, but now you're adding it to an account that might already have $20,000 or more. The compound effect is becoming more noticeable, and you start to see months where your investments grow by more than your monthly contributions. This is the turning point where many people finally understand what compound growth actually means in practice. By year 4, the mathematics start feeling almost surreal. You're contributing $400 per month, but your account might be growing by $800 or $1,000 some months just from market appreciation. Your money is doing an increasing share of the work while you continue doing exactly what you've been doing all along. This is when people start getting excited about investing instead of viewing it as just another monthly expense. The psychological transformation that happens during this process is just as important as the financial one. During the first year, investing $100 per week requires discipline and faith. You're sacrificing immediate gratification for a future payoff that feels theoretical. But as you watch your account balance grow, something changes in your brain. You start thinking like an investor instead of just a consumer. This mindset shift affects every financial decision you make. Instead of asking whether you can afford something, you start asking what that money could become if you invested it instead. That $500 vacation starts looking different when you realize it could be worth $1,000 in 5 years if you invested it. That expensive dinner out becomes less appealing when you consider the opportunity cost of not investing that money. Here's something that might blow your mind about the $100 weekly strategy. It's not actually about the specific amount. It's about building the habit and identity of someone who invests consistently. The person who can stick to $100 per week for 5 years has developed something far more valuable than just money in an investment account. They've proven to themselves that they can delay gratification, stay consistent through market ups and downs, and prioritize their future self over their current impulses. This habit and identity becomes the foundation for everything that comes next. Because once you hit that $100,000 milestone, the same principles that got you there can take you to $500,000, then $1 million, then beyond. The math just gets more exciting as the numbers grow larger. But there's another layer to this strategy that most people don't consider. The timing of when you start matters enormously. Someone who begins this $100 weekly investment strategy at age 25 versus someone who starts at age 45 will have dramatically different outcomes. Not just because of the extra years, but because of how compound growth accelerates over longer time periods. The beautiful thing about starting with $100 per week is that it's accessible to most people with steady income. But it's substantial enough to create real wealth over time. It's not so small that it feels meaningless, but it's not so large that it requires major lifestyle sacrifices for most middle-class earners. Each of those 5 years, because understanding the let during year 1, you're essentially building momentum from zero. Every timeline makes this whole process feel much more real and achievable. Me break down what happens to your money during fund or diversified portfolio you've chosen. Some account, and you start accumulating shares of whatever index week. That $100 goes into your investment consistently regardless of what's happening with stock at working, and they should probably just keep weeks the market is up, some weeks it's down, but you're buying prices. The psychological challenge during this first year is that progress, that money in a savings account instead. But here's what's actually happening beneath thinking that the extra $600 in growth isn't 6 months, and see $2,800 worth the sacrifice of $100 per week. This feels painfully slow. You might look at your account after as the point where most people convince themselves that investing isn't the surface. You're not just accumulating money becoming visible. You're still contributing the same amount each week, but now you're adding fresh. You're accumulating time in the market, each week that working for you for an entire year by the time you reach this milestone. It's earned first $100 you invested in week one has been passes gives your earlier investments more opportunity to compound, that their own returns. Year two is where the magic starts returns, and those returns have started earning money to an account that already has some $12,500 by the end of year serious substance. Maybe your account balance hits $400 of your own money. That extra $2 too, even though you've only contributed $10, didn't work any extra hours for that $2,100. You didn't take on a side hustle or negotiate is when people start to understand what passive income actually means. U100 represents your investments working on your behalf. This arrays. Your money simply grew because it was invested in assets that appreciate over time. This realization often creates a shift in thinking that extends far beyond just this investment to add $100 weekly to what might now be a $25,000 account. The compound affect your account balance and your mindset, your continuing account. The third year brings even more dramatic changes to both months, where your investment gains exceed your monthly contributions. Maybe is becoming undeniable and you start having your account grows by $800 due you contribute $400 in a given month, but to market appreciation. This is the year when most people become true believers in the power of consistent investing. They stop viewing that weekly $100 as money they're losing and start seeing it as the most important financial habit they've ever developed. They begin to understand that this isn't just about reaching $100,000 in 5 years. It's about developing the foundation for lifelong wealth building. Year 4 often feels surreal compared to those early months of slow progress. You're adding the same $100 per week, but now you're doing it to an account that might already contain $45,000 or more. The psychological impact of watching your investments grow by more than your contributions in a single month cannot be overstated. It fundamentally changes how you think about money and time. By this point, you've also weathered at least one market downturn, which is crucial for developing the emotional resilience needed for long-term investing. Maybe there was a period where your account value dropped by $5,000 or $10,000, but you kept making those weekly contributions anyway. Watching your account recover and reach new highs teaches you that market volatility is temporary, but compound growth is permanent if you stay consistent. The fifth and final year brings everything full circle. You're adding $100 per week to what has become a substantial investment portfolio. The account might already be approaching $80,000 before that final year even begins. Your money has momentum now, growing faster than ever before because there's simply more of it working in your favor. Here's something fascinating about human psychology during this process. Most people start the 5-year journey focused entirely on the $100,000 end goal. But somewhere around year 3 or 4, the goal shifts. They stop thinking about reaching $100,000 and start thinking about what comes after. They begin to understand that this is just the beginning, not the end. The person who successfully completes this 5-year challenge has accomplished something that goes far beyond just accumulating money. They've proven to themselves that they can stick to a long-term plan even when progress feels slow. They've learned to ignore market noise and media predictions about crashes and corrections. Most importantly, they've developed the investor mindset that separates wealthy people from everyone else. This mindset transformation affects every area of their financial life. They start optimizing their tax situation to keep more of their investment gains. They begin thinking about asset allocation and diversification. They research different types of investment accounts and start maximizing their contributions to tax-advantaged retirement plans. But perhaps the most significant change is how they view time itself. Before starting this journey, 5 years might have felt like an eternity to wait for results. After completing it, they realize that 5 years passes quickly. And the person who doesn't invest those 5 years ends up in the exact same place they started, just 5 years older. The mathematical beauty of this strategy becomes even more apparent when you consider what happens next. That $100,000 account doesn't just sit there after year 5. If you continue the same weekly contributions, but now you're adding $100 per week to a $100,000 base. Instead of starting from zero, the acceleration becomes almost comical. Your second $100,000 doesn't take another 5 years to accumulate. It takes roughly 3.5 years because you have so much more money working alongside your weekly contributions. The third $100,000 takes even less time, and so on. This is the power of compound growth at scale, and it's why people who understand this concept often become obsessed with starting as early as possible. The strategy also creates an interesting buffer against lifestyle inflation, which is one of the biggest threats to long-term wealth building. When you're automatically investing $100 every week, that money never hits your checking account where it might be tempted by impulse purchases or lifestyle upgrades. It gets whisked away before you have a chance to spend it on things that won't matter in 5 years. This forced savings mechanism is incredibly powerful because it removes the daily decision-making from the equation. You don't have to rely on willpower or motivation to build wealth. The system does it automatically, regardless of how you're feeling on any given week or what's happening in your personal life. The beauty of this automated approach becomes even more apparent when you consider what typically happens to people who try to invest sporadically. They wait for the perfect moment, which never comes. They try to time the market, buying when things feel good and selling when they get scared. They let emotions drive their investment decisions instead of sticking to a systematic approach. Meanwhile, the person following the $100 weekly strategy is completely insulated from these psychological traps. They're buying shares every single week, regardless of whether the market is up, down, or sideways. This dollar-cost averaging effect means they naturally buy more shares when prices are low and fewer shares when prices are high, which is exactly what you want to do as a long-term investor. Here's something that might surprise you about the psychology of reaching that $100,000 milestone. Most people expect to feel dramatically different once they hit 6 figures in their investment account. They imagine it will feel like crossing some magical threshold into wealth. But the reality is often more subtle. What actually happens is a quiet confidence that builds over time. You start making different decisions about everything else in your life. Maybe you're more willing to take calculated risks in your career because you know you have a financial foundation. Perhaps you stop losing sleep over unexpected expenses because you understand that your investment account is growing faster than most emergencies can drain it. The peace of mind that comes from consistent wealth building touches every aspect of your daily existence. But there's another psychological shift that happens around the $75,000 mark that catches most people off guard. You start thinking about money in terms of what it could become rather than what it is right now. That $500 car repair doesn't just cost $500 anymore. In your investor brain, it costs whatever that $500 could have grown to over the next decade if you had invested it instead. This opportunity cost thinking can be dangerous if taken to extremes, but when applied thoughtfully, it helps you make much better financial decisions. You start distinguishing between expenses that truly improve your life and expenses that just make you feel better temporarily. You become much more intentional about where your money goes because you understand the long-term implications of every dollar. The social dynamics around money start changing too. Your friends might notice that you're less stressed about financial emergencies or that you approach major purchases differently. Some might ask how you're building wealth so steadily, while others might not understand why you're not buying the latest gadgets or taking expensive vacations every year. This is where staying consistent becomes both easier and harder. Easier because you've seen the results and know the system works. Harder because you might feel social pressure to spend money on things that don't align with your long-term goals. The person who successfully navigates this challenge learns to find satisfaction in progress rather than in immediate gratification. There's also something fascinating that happens to your relationship with market volatility as you approach the 5-year mark. Those early market dips that might have caused panic now feel like buying opportunities. You start hoping for temporary market corrections because you know they allow your weekly $100 to purchase more shares at discounted prices. This shift in perspective is crucial because it means you're no longer fighting against market volatility, you're using it to your advantage. The weekly investment strategy naturally capitalizes on market fluctuations without requiring any special knowledge or perfect timing. You're essentially getting the benefits of sophisticated investment strategies through simple, consistent execution. The tax implications of this approach also become more significant as your account grows. That $100,000 isn't just sitting there waiting to be spent. It's generating dividends and capital gains that need to be managed intelligently. Many people discover they need to start thinking about tax loss harvesting, asset location strategies, and the difference between tax-efficient and tax-inefficient investments. These aren't problems, they're high-quality problems that indicate you've successfully built substantial wealth. But they do require a different level of financial sophistication than simply making weekly contributions. This is often when people start working with financial advisors or diving deeper into investment education. The most profound realization usually comes somewhere in year 4 or 5 when you calculate how much passive income your investment account is generating. Maybe your $80,000 portfolio is producing $8,000 per year in growth without any additional contributions from you. That's like getting a part-time job that pays $667 per month, except this job requires no time, no commuting, and no boss. This passive income component is what separates wealth building from just saving money. Your investments are working around the clock, generating returns while you sleep, while you're at your day job, while you're on vacation. The money you invested in week 1 has been working for you for 5 full years by the time you reach your goal. Understanding this concept often leads to what financial experts call the investor's mindset. You stop thinking about money as something you trade directly for time and start thinking about it as something that can work independently to create more money. This mindset shift is often more valuable than the actual dollars in your investment account because it influences every financial decision you make for the rest of your life. The person who completes this 5-year challenge has developed something that most people never acquire, regardless of their income level. They've learned to delay gratification consistently, to ignore short-term market noise, and to trust in the power of compound growth. These skills become the foundation for building even greater wealth in the decades that follow. But perhaps the most important lesson is how achievable this whole process actually is. $100 per week isn't an impossible amount for most people with steady employment. It requires some sacrifice and prioritization, but it doesn't require a 6-figure salary or a trust fund. It just requires consistency and patience, 2 qualities that anyone can develop with practice. The mathematics of turning $100 per week into $100,000 over 5 years isn't complicated or mysterious. It's basic compound growth working exactly as it should. The challenge isn't understanding the math. It's executing the plan consistently when life gets complicated, markets get volatile, and other priorities compete for your attention. This is why the weekly investment habit is so much more than just a wealth-building strategy. It's a practice in developing the character traits that lead to financial success in all areas of life. Discipline, patience, long-term thinking, and the ability to ignore short-term fluctuations in favor of long-term progress. So there you have it. The journey from your first weekly $100 investment to a 6-figure portfolio isn't just about the money. Though that $74,000 in compound growth certainly doesn't hurt. It's about proving to yourself that you can stick to a plan when everyone around you is chasing the latest investment trend or complaining that building wealth takes too long. 5 years might seem like forever when you're just getting started, but here's the thing that might shock you. Those 5 years are going to pass whether you invest that $100 every week or not. The only question is whether you want to end up 5 years older with $100,000 in investments, or 5 years older wondering why you never started. The person scrolling through their bank account 5 years from now, seeing that substantial investment balance instead of wondering where their money went. That could be you. But only if you stop thinking about it and actually start doing it. Because the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, but the second best time is right now. Your future self is counting on the decision you make today.